"Officer, that's him. He's been sitting here watching the children for almost an hour." The words sliced through the warm Saturday afternoon so sharply that conversations stopped in every direction. Parents turned their heads. Joggers slowed their pace. A little boy chasing a bright red soccer ball froze long enough to look toward the woman pointing across the park. Rebecca Collins stood beside a freshly painted picnic table, one hand gripping her cell phone, the other stretched toward a quiet teenager sitting alone beneath the shade of an old maple tree. Her breathing came fast, fueled by certainty rather than evidence. The 911 dispatcher's calm voice floated through the speaker, asking careful questions, but Rebecca barely hesitated before giving confident answers. Black male. Around 17. Dark hoodie. Large backpack. He keeps staring toward the playground. "I think something's wrong." Less than 100 feet away, Jordan Brooks never realized the call had already been made. He sat with his elbows resting lightly on his knees, a thick SAT preparation book open across his lap. Every few minutes he glanced toward the colorful art building near the far edge of the park before checking the time on an old digital watch with a cracked band. The afternoon sunlight filtered through thousands of green leaves overhead, scattering shifting patches of gold across the sidewalk and the worn wooden bench where he waited. His backpack rested neatly against one leg. A reusable water bottle peeked from the side pocket beside several sharpened pencils. Everything about him suggested patience, routine, and purpose. Yet from where Rebecca stood, every ordinary movement seemed suspicious. She watched him close his textbook for a moment and scan the playground again. To her, it looked like surveillance. She watched him reach into his backpack. To her, it felt unsettling. She watched him smile faintly at something happening across the field. To her, it confirmed the uneasy feeling she could no longer ignore. Around her, no one else appeared alarmed. Children laughed as they climbed across colorful monkey bars. A grandfather pushed his granddaughter gently on a swing. 2. Teenagers practiced basketball shots near the recreation center. A golden retriever chased a tennis ball through fresh-cut grass while its owner laughed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. The park felt peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Rebecca tightened her grip on her phone. "Please hurry," she whispered into it. "I don't want to wait until something happens." Across the walkway, Jordan quietly slipped a folded envelope halfway out of his backpack just long enough to glance at the return address before sliding it back inside with unusual care. He exhaled slowly, looked once more toward the art building, then opened his study guide again. His lips moved silently as he reviewed vocabulary words, blocking out the distant sounds of bicycles rolling over pavement and birds calling from the treetops. He never noticed several strangers beginning to watch him instead of their own families. He never noticed Rebecca stepping farther into the open, convinced she had done exactly the right thing. Then, somewhere beyond the park entrance, the faint sound of approaching police sirens drifted through the afternoon air, growing louder with every passing second. 45 minutes earlier, the park had looked completely different through Jordan Brooks's eyes. The afternoon had begun with the familiar rumble of an aging city bus pulling away from the curb 3 blocks from Maple Grove Park. Jordan adjusted the strap of his faded backpack, thanked the driver, and started the short walk he had taken almost every weekday for the past 2 years. The late September air carried just enough warmth to remind him that summer had not completely surrendered. Dry leaves rolled across the sidewalk whenever a breeze slipped between the neighborhood houses. He stopped briefly at a corner convenience store, counted the bills folded carefully inside his wallet, and bought 2 bottles of water and a discounted turkey sandwich that the cashier marked down because it would expire the next day. Every dollar mattered. College application fees were only a few months away, and Jordan had been saving every possible cent from his weekend job at a neighborhood grocery store. He smiled politely at the cashier, tucked the receipt into his pocket, and continued toward the park without wasting a single minute. At exactly 4:15 in the afternoon, he reached the same weathered bench beneath the old maple tree where he always waited. From there he could see the entrance to the community art center without blocking anyone's path or disturbing families enjoying the playground. He removed a thick SAT study guide from his backpack, along with a notebook filled with handwritten vocabulary words and practice math problems. Several pages had been rewritten so many times that the corners had become soft and worn. His guidance counselor had told him that a strong score could open doors no one in his family had ever walked through before. Jordan believed her. He also believed that dreams required ordinary discipline repeated every single day. Every few minutes he glanced toward the art building, not because he was distracted from studying, but because his 12-year-old sister, Ava, attended a free weekend art program inside. Their mother worked double shifts at a local hospital, and missing pickup time was never an option. Jordan had made himself a quiet promise after their father passed away several years earlier. As long as he could get there first, Ava would never have to walk home alone. That promise had become part of who he was. He opened the folded envelope resting inside his backpack once more. Across the top, bold letters announced that he had been selected as a finalist for a statewide academic scholarship interview. The opportunity felt enormous, but so did the responsibility that came with it. He carefully slipped the letter back into its envelope before anyone nearby could accidentally spill a drink or send a gust of wind across the bench. Then he took another sip of water, opened his study guide to the next practice section, and began reading aloud under his breath. Around him, children laughed, bicycles rolled across winding paths, and parents called out cheerful reminders to stay where they could be seen. Jordan barely noticed any of it. His attention remained divided between the pages in front of him and the clock ticking steadily toward 5. A clock, completely unaware that someone nearby had already begun weaving an entirely different story about the quiet teenager sitting beneath the maple tree. Rebecca Collins had lived across from Maple Grove Park for almost 12 years, long enough to recognize the faces of regular dog walkers, retired couples, and children who had grown from tricycles to bicycles. She considered herself observant. Friends often praised her for paying attention to details that others overlooked, and over time she had quietly convinced herself that vigilance was the same thing as wisdom. Earlier that afternoon she had arrived carrying a canvas tote bag filled with library books, planning to spend an hour reading while her neighbor's grandson played on the swings nearby. At first she barely noticed Jordan sitting beneath the maple tree. He looked like any other teenager enjoying the mild weather. But then she saw him glance toward the playground. A few minutes later he looked up again. Then once more after turning a page in his study guide. Each perfectly ordinary glance became something different inside Rebecca's imagination. She never walked close enough to hear him softly reading vocabulary words to himself. She never noticed the practice questions covering every page of his notebook. She did not see the scholarship letter tucked carefully inside his backpack or the grocery store name stitched onto the part-time employee badge hanging from his keychain. Instead, her attention settled on the things that seemed easiest to judge from a distance. The dark hoodie despite the warm afternoon. The worn backpack resting beside him. The fact that he was alone. Confirmation arrived not through facts but through assumptions that quietly reinforced one another until they felt undeniable. She watched him check his watch again and interpreted patience as waiting for an opportunity. She watched him glance toward the art center and believed he was studying the children instead of watching for his sister. Around her, the park continued breathing with ordinary life. A mother laughed while blowing bubbles that drifted through the sunlight like tiny floating crystals. Two elderly men argued cheerfully over a chess game beneath a gazebo. A volunteer trimmed flowers near the entrance, filling the air with the fresh scent of damp soil and cut lavender. Nothing around Rebecca suggested danger, yet the story forming inside her mind became stronger than everything unfolding before her eyes. She stood slowly, pretending to organize the books inside her tote while moving to a better position where she could continue watching Jordan without being noticed. Nearly 30 minutes passed. Jordan never approached anyone. He never left his bench except to toss an empty sandwich wrapper into a nearby trash can before returning to his studies. Still, Rebecca interpreted his calm routine as careful calculation. When she finally reached for her telephone, the decision no longer felt emotional. It felt responsible. She believed she was protecting families who had not even realized they needed protection. The dispatcher asked whether the teenager had threatened anyone. Rebecca answered no. Had he spoken to any children? No. Had he committed any crime she could describe? She hesitated for the briefest moment before saying, "Not yet, but something does not feel right." Those words echoed in the quiet space between certainty and truth. Seconds later, she watched the first patrol car turn through the park entrance, convinced she had done the right thing, while Jordan remained seated beneath the maple tree, completely unaware that another person's assumptions were about to interrupt one of the most ordinary afternoons of his life. The first patrol car rolled quietly onto the curved park road before stopping beside the walking trail. A second vehicle followed a few moments later, its flashing lights reflecting softly across the nearby pond without the urgency many people expected. Officer Daniel Harris stepped out first, adjusting the small notebook in his hand while scanning the area exactly as the dispatcher had described. Families instinctively moved aside. Conversations faded into whispers. Several people lifted their phones, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Jordan looked up from his study guide only after hearing footsteps approaching the bench. He removed one earbud, although no music had been playing through it, and offered a polite expression of confusion. "Good afternoon," Officer Harris said in a calm, professional voice. "Would you mind speaking with me for a moment?" Jordan immediately closed his book and stood without hesitation. "Of course, sir," he answered. His voice remained steady even though curious eyes were beginning to settle on him from every direction. The officer explained that someone had reported suspicious behavior and asked whether Jordan had identification. "Yes, sir," Jordan replied. He slowly reached into his backpack only after the officer nodded, carefully removing his student identification card along with his state learner permit. Officer Harris accepted both, thanked him, and glanced over the information. Everything appeared exactly as expected. Jordan Brooks. 17 years old. Local address only a few miles away. "What brings you to the park today?" the officer asked. Jordan pointed toward the community arts center across the lawn. "My little sister finishes class at 5 o'clock every Saturday. I always pick her up because my mother is working at the hospital." Officer Harris followed Jordan's gesture toward the brick building where colorful paintings decorated the windows. Before he could respond, Rebecca Collins walked confidently toward them. "That is him," she insisted. "I watched him sitting here for almost an hour. He kept looking at the playground." Several nearby parents exchanged uncertain glances. Jordan turned toward Rebecca, his expression showing surprise rather than anger. It was the first time he had even realized she had been watching him. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I was looking toward the art center because my sister is inside." Rebecca folded her arms. "That is not what it looked like." Her words hung in the warm afternoon air while a light breeze scattered a handful of maple leaves across the sidewalk between them. Officer Harris looked back at Jordan. "Would you mind if I took a quick look inside your backpack?" Jordan nodded immediately. "No problem, sir." He carefully unzipped the worn bag and placed it on the bench. Inside were neatly stacked textbooks, sharpened pencils, a half-finished bottle of water, the discounted sandwich wrapper, a calculator, and the cream-colored envelope containing his scholarship interview invitation. There was nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Only the belongings of a hard-working student preparing for a future he hoped would be brighter than his past. The officer gently returned the envelope exactly where he had found it and looked around the park once more. Children continued laughing. Dogs continued chasing tennis balls. The ordinary rhythm of the afternoon had never truly stopped, yet dozens of strangers remained watching in complete silence, waiting to discover whether first impressions would prove stronger than the truth standing quietly beneath the old maple tree. The silence stretched across the park until the distant door of the community art center swung open with a soft click. Children spilled onto the sidewalk carrying sketchbooks, colorful paintings, and oversized folders tucked beneath their arms. Their cheerful voices floated through the cool afternoon air, completely unaware of the uneasy circle that had formed beneath the maple tree. Jordan instinctively glanced toward the entrance, and for the first time since Officer Harris had approached him, a small smile appeared on his face. He checked the time again. 4:59. Exactly as expected. 1 second later, a bright voice rang across the lawn. Jordan. A young girl with tightly braided hair burst through the crowd carrying a canvas art portfolio nearly as wide as her shoulders. Ava Brooks spotted her brother immediately and hurried toward him with the excitement only a 12-year-old could show after finishing something she loved. She reached him within moments and wrapped both arms around his waist before looking up with complete confusion. "Why are there police here?" she asked quietly. Jordan rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Everything is all right," he answered with a gentle smile. "They just wanted to ask me a few questions." Before anyone else could speak, another woman hurried from the art center carrying a clipboard. She wore a blue volunteer shirt with the words Maple Grove Community Arts printed across the front. "Jordan," she called, slightly out of breath. "I am so sorry we ran a couple of minutes late today." She paused as she noticed the officers and the crowd. "Is everything okay?" Officer Harris introduced himself and briefly explained why they had responded. The volunteer's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "You mean Jordan?" she asked. "He has been picking Ava up every Saturday for almost 2 years. He always arrives early, sits under that same tree, studies while he waits, and never leaves until she walks out those doors." She pointed toward the bench beneath the maple tree. "Half of our staff knows him. Sometimes he even helps younger students carry their art supplies to their parents' cars." Several nearby parents slowly nodded. One father stepped forward. "She is right," he said. "I have seen this young man here almost every weekend." Another mother added quietly, "My daughter says he always tells the little kids their paintings look amazing." The whispers moving through the crowd began to change. The uncertainty that had filled the park only minutes earlier slowly gave way to something heavier. Embarrassment. Reflection. Officer Harris looked from Ava to Jordan, then toward the stack of textbooks still resting neatly on the bench. Nothing about the afternoon matched the fear described in the emergency call. Rebecca remained standing several feet away, her confidence fading with every new voice. She opened her mouth as though searching for another explanation, but none arrived. The story she had built from distant observations quietly unraveled in front of dozens of witnesses without anyone raising their voice. Jordan simply picked up Ava's art portfolio before handing her one of the unopened water bottles from his backpack. "You must be thirsty," he said softly. Ava smiled, thanked him, and began excitedly describing the watercolor painting she had finished in class, completely unaware that her ordinary words had just revealed the simple truth everyone else had failed to see. The crowd gradually drifted back toward the ordinary rhythm of the park, yet the air still carried a quiet weight that no one seemed eager to disturb. The patrol cars remained parked along the curb, but their flashing lights had already been turned off, leaving only the gentle rustle of maple leaves and the distant laughter of children echoing across the open lawn. Golden sunlight stretched lower across the grass, painting long shadows beneath the old tree where Jordan quietly repacked his backpack. He slid his SAT study guide inside first, then his notebook, then the carefully folded scholarship letter, treating each item with the same quiet respect he had shown before the afternoon had unexpectedly changed. Ava stood beside him, holding her watercolor painting against her chest with both hands. Bright shades of blue and orange reflected the fading sunlight, but she looked up at her brother instead of admiring her own artwork. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Jordan looked at her for a moment before offering the same calm smile he always gave whenever she worried about something. "I am okay," he answered. Let us get you home before Mom starts wondering where we are. Ava nodded, satisfied by the familiar steadiness in his voice. Officer Daniel Harris watched the exchange without interrupting. He had spoken with countless people during his years in uniform, and experience had taught him that character often revealed itself in quiet moments rather than dramatic ones. Jordan had every reason to sound frustrated or embarrassed, yet he chose patience instead. The officer glanced toward the weathered bench where the young man had spent the afternoon studying. A single pencil remained resting on the wooden seat. Jordan noticed it only after helping Ava adjust the strap on her art portfolio. He walked back, picked it up, brushed away a few tiny wood chips, and tucked it carefully into the front pocket of his backpack. Such a small gesture somehow seemed to reflect the rest of his life. Nothing wasted. Nothing taken for granted. Rebecca Collins remained several yards away, standing beside the picnic table where she had first reached for her telephone. The confidence that had carried her through the afternoon had quietly disappeared, replaced by a silence she could not explain away. She watched Jordan helping Ava zip her jacket as a cool breeze drifted through the park. The scene unfolding before her looked painfully ordinary. A responsible older brother. A younger sister excited to share her artwork. Homework waiting inside a worn backpack. A family routine repeated week after week. She realized that everything she had feared had existed only inside the story she had created for herself. The truth had been sitting beneath the maple tree the entire time, turning pages, studying for exams, and waiting for someone he loved. The sun slipped lower behind the trees, filling the park with warm amber light that softened every edge of the afternoon. Jordan adjusted the backpack over one shoulder, accepted Ava's hand without a word, and started walking slowly toward the sidewalk. Neither of them looked back. Their footsteps remained steady, their conversation quiet, disappearing into the gentle sounds of evening while those left behind continued standing exactly where they were, each carrying home something far heavier than anything Jordan had packed into his backpack. Before Jordan and Ava reached the park entrance, a clear voice rose from behind them. "Officer Harris, please wait." Everyone turned toward the sound. Emma Reed, a 34-year-old freelance photographer who spent many weekends capturing family events around Maple Grove Park, hurried across the sidewalk with a professional camera hanging from one shoulder and a smartphone already unlocked in her hand. She looked slightly out of breath, but her expression carried quiet determination. "I think you should see something before everyone leaves," she said. Officer Harris nodded and stepped closer. Emma opened a video she had recorded earlier that afternoon while testing a new camera lens aimed toward the playground. The recording covered nearly 40 minutes of ordinary park activity. Jordan appeared only in the background, sitting beneath the maple tree exactly where everyone had seen him. He barely moved except to study, drink water, check his watch, and throw away his lunch wrapper. But another figure repeatedly entered the frame. Rebecca. The video showed her slowly changing benches several times until she had a clear view of Jordan. It captured her stopping to watch him for long stretches without ever approaching him or speaking to him. At one point she even raised her telephone, apparently zooming in before lowering it again. Minute after minute passed. Jordan never walked toward the playground. He never spoke to a child. He never behaved in any threatening or unusual way. The only person actively following someone else's movements was Rebecca herself. Silence settled over the small group as the final seconds of the recording played. Officer Harris watched the video a second time, paying close attention to the timestamps. The sequence left little room for misunderstanding. The concern described in the emergency call had not developed from any observable conduct. It had grown entirely from assumptions. Emma lowered her phone carefully. "I almost deleted the clip because I was only testing focus," she explained softly. "Then I realized it showed everything from the beginning." Rebecca stared at the screen without saying a word. She remembered every moment shown in the recording because she had lived it, yet seeing it through another person's camera felt completely different. The certainty she had carried throughout the afternoon dissolved beneath the quiet honesty of unedited images. There was no dramatic confrontation. No hidden mystery. No suspicious behavior waiting to be uncovered. Only a hardworking teenager patiently waiting for his younger sister while preparing for college. Officer Harris slipped his notebook into his pocket and looked toward Rebecca with a calm expression. Sometimes, he said gently, what we believe we see is not the same as what is actually happening. His words were not harsh, but they landed with unmistakable weight. Rebecca lowered her eyes. For the first time that day she realized she had never wondered who Jordan was. She had never asked why he came to the park. She had never considered that the backpack beside him might hold textbooks instead of danger, or that every glance toward the art center came from responsibility rather than suspicion. She had filled every unanswered question with fear instead of curiosity. Jordan remained standing quietly beside Ava, saying nothing. He did not celebrate being proven right. He did not ask for anyone to be embarrassed. He simply waited, allowing the truth to speak with a calm strength that no accusation had ever possessed. Rebecca took one slow step forward, then another, until she stood only a few feet from Jordan and Ava. The late afternoon breeze lifted a loose strand of her hair, but she did not seem to notice. Her attention remained fixed on the young man whose ordinary afternoon she had transformed into something it had never been. For several long seconds she searched for words that refused to come. The confidence that had guided every decision earlier that day had vanished, leaving only quiet honesty behind. Finally, she drew a careful breath. Jordan, she said softly, I owe you an apology. He looked at her without anger, simply waiting. Rebecca lowered her eyes before continuing. I believed a story that was never true. I looked at you from a distance and decided who you were before I ever gave you the chance to show me. I told myself I was protecting people, but I never stopped to ask whether anyone actually needed protection. Her voice trembled slightly. I am deeply sorry. The park remained almost completely silent. Even those who had begun walking away paused again, sensing that this moment mattered more than everything that had happened before it. Jordan glanced briefly at Ava, who stood quietly beside him holding her painting with both hands. Then he looked back at Rebecca. His expression stayed calm, thoughtful, and remarkably gentle. Thank you for saying that, he replied. Apologies matter because they give people a chance to grow. Rebecca nodded, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. I do not expect you to forgive me right away, she admitted. I only hope that someday you will remember me for admitting I was wrong instead of pretending I was right. Jordan rested one hand on the strap of his backpack before answering. My mother always tells us that fear can make people imagine things that are not there. She also says that asking one honest question is usually better than making 100 quiet assumptions. He smiled politely, not with triumph but with compassion. Next time, maybe just say hello first. Rebecca let out a small breath that sounded almost like a laugh through her emotion. I will, she whispered. I promise I will. Officer Daniel Harris watched the exchange with quiet respect. During his career he had witnessed many disagreements, but very few ended with humility instead of pride. He stepped toward Jordan and extended his hand. You handled today with more patience than many adults would have, he said sincerely. Jordan shook his hand. Thank you, officer. Harris smiled warmly. I hope that scholarship interview goes well. Jordan blinked in surprise. You saw the letter? I did, the officer answered. Something tells me you have worked very hard for that opportunity. Jordan nodded. I have. Then keep going, Harris said. The world needs more young people who stay focused even when life becomes unfair. Ava slipped her hand into her brother's again, her watercolor painting catching the golden light as the evening sun settled lower behind the trees. Around them, the tension that had filled the park all afternoon quietly dissolved. Conversations slowly resumed. Children laughed once more near the swings. Somewhere nearby, a musician began playing a soft melody on an acoustic guitar, and for the first time since the patrol cars had arrived, the park finally felt like a place where strangers could become neighbors again. Jordan and Ava walked slowly toward the neighborhood sidewalk as the last light of day settled gently across Maple Grove Park. The evening sky glowed with soft shades of gold and pale blue, and the breeze carried the familiar scent of fresh grass and distant flowers. Ava happily balanced her watercolor painting beneath one arm while telling her brother every detail about the tiny bluebird she had painted near the corner of the page. Jordan listened with quiet attention, asking questions that made her smile even wider. To anyone passing by, they looked exactly as they had looked every Saturday before this one. A devoted older brother walking his little sister home. Nothing more. Nothing less. Behind them, Officer Daniel Harris watched until the two figures disappeared beyond the row of maple trees before returning to his patrol car. He paused one last time, looking back at the weathered bench where Jordan had spent the afternoon preparing for an opportunity that could shape the rest of his life. The bench had not changed. The tree had not changed. Only the people who had witnessed the day would leave carrying something different. Rebecca remained alone near the picnic table, holding the library books she had never opened. She slowly walked toward the empty bench beneath the maple tree and sat down where Jordan had spent so many quiet afternoons. For the first time, she noticed the tiny carved initials worn into the weathered wood, the pencil marks left behind by years of students studying outdoors, and the peaceful view of the community art center across the lawn. She imagined how many times Jordan had sat there reviewing vocabulary words, waiting patiently for Ava to finish class, never realizing that someone could mistake simple responsibility for something else entirely. She lowered her head and quietly whispered to herself, "Next time, I will ask before I assume." No one else heard the promise, but somehow it felt important that she had finally spoken it aloud. Across the park, Emma Reed packed away her camera after saving the video she almost deleted. She smiled faintly, grateful that a simple recording had helped preserve the truth when memory alone might not have been enough. Families gathered their blankets, children chased one last game before sunset, and the musician near the walking trail continued playing a gentle melody that drifted through the cooling evening air. Life moved forward with its ordinary rhythm once again. Several weeks later, Officer Harris happened to stop by the same park while finishing another patrol. As he passed the familiar maple tree, he smiled. Jordan was there again. The same backpack rested beside him. The same SAT study guide lay open across his lap. At exactly 5 o'clock, Ava came running from the art center holding another painting, and the two siblings laughed together as they started the walk home. Nothing about their routine had changed. Officer Harris chose not to interrupt. He simply nodded to himself before driving away, comforted by the quiet certainty that some stories did not need dramatic endings to matter. Sometimes the greatest victory was that kindness refused to disappear, even after being questioned. Long after everyone else forgot the details of that afternoon, Maple Grove Park remained exactly what it had always been, a place where children played, families gathered, dreams were quietly prepared beneath old trees, and where one simple lesson lingered like the last warm light of sunset. The strongest judgment is never made from a distance. It begins with the courage to see another human being before seeing anything else.